Thank you, Sir Les. It's a pleasure to serve under you. And I'm grateful for the opportunity, as a member representing a Northern Ireland constituency, to speak in respect of these regulations. They come in a context where, indisputably, we have already seen substantial and worrying diversion of trade in terms of supply of goods and produce to Northern Ireland. The most recent NISTRA figures indicate just how significant that is. And yet within the Windsor framework there is supposedly a mechanism under Article 16 to enable government to take action if diversion of trade is happening. But this government, like the last, is blind to that issue and doesn't want to take on the EU on any of these matters. I think it's important for the committee to understand the genesis of how we got to this point, because this all arises from the SPS regulation made by the EU, Regulation 2023-1231. And the most astounding thing about that regulation is that it makes rules. This is a regulation made by a foreign political organisation, the EU. It makes regulations which exclusively apply to non-EU territory. It makes regulations which does not apply to itself, but makes regulations which apply to this United Kingdom. The first time since Brexit that the EU has asserted legislative power over the United Kingdom. And it tells this United Kingdom that in a sequence series of 3 steps, there shall be introduced by this United Kingdom, not for EU labelling, in respect of goods moving within this United Kingdom, from Great Britain to Northern Ireland. Now, those 3 steps and that requirement is not the legislative product of this House, is not the proposal of this or the last government. This is the diktat of the EU, that there will be, and they're set out in Regulation 123 of 2023, the 3 steps which will be taken. As the Minister has alluded to, today we come to the final 3rd step, that which is to be introduced on the 1st of July, just in a few days' time. And that decrees that, building upon the previous 2 steps, goods which are moving from Great Britain, allegedly within the UK's internal market, must by EU law carry a not for EU label. And that, of course, has cost implications for those who are sending them. And that is why, on those already imposed, we have seen a number of companies simply opt out of supplying Northern Ireland. But here is the most ludicrous aspect of this SPS regulation. It creates no prohibition on any EU citizen, most particularly in the Republic of Ireland, purchasing any of these not for EU goods. So we put upon GB suppliers a costly obligation to engage in labelling of goods they might be sending to Northern Ireland. But within Northern Ireland, anyone from the Republic of Ireland can come and buy those goods and do whatever they want with them. Now, this is supposedly about protecting the EU single market. How can it be that we have this ludicrous situation that goods are labelled not for the EU, but can be bought into the EU with no consequence? All under an EU regulation that puts burden on the United Kingdom, no burden on their own citizens. And if anyone goes any day of the week, I guarantee if anyone went now, at this very moment, to any of our supermarkets in Northern Ireland around the border, Enniskillen, Londonderry, Newry, they would see people filling up the boots of their cars with goods labelled not for EU because they're cheaper. And yet we have this ludicrous situation whereby on British manufacturers we're now going to impose an even wider duty. For what purpose? For the purpose only of showing us how compliant doormats we are for the EU, for no practical purpose whatsoever. That's the reality of this situation. And so I say to this committee, you should not approve a regulation of this genesis and this nature. And of course, it is going to put burden on industry in Great Britain. Now, it's not as if there aren't already burdens, because even under the internal market scheme, if you're sending produce to Northern Ireland, you must fill in a customs form, a customs declaration, expense in itself. You must belong to a trusted trader scheme, further expense in itself. And then on top of that, you're now going to have to label your goods not for EU, even though there's no farcical purpose. No purpose other than that which is farcical in doing that. And I do say to this committee, surely out of respect for your own GB businesses, you should not be rushing into approving a regulation such as this, because it will put burdens and it will cause companies to delist. And the explanatory document 5.2 recognises what some of us have always been saying, that if you create an Irish sea border, if you create barriers within your own supposed internal market, you will discourage trade. And that is why the government say they're bringing these as a protection against discouraging trade. But will it? Well, first of all, any small company, that's a company with less than 50 employees, is not affected. They can delist Northern Ireland with no consequence. So in my constituency, artisan cheese people who might buy from a small supplier in Wiltshire or dear knows where will no longer simply be supplied with no penalty upon the provider, because small companies are exempt from this. And to enforce the requirement on GB producers to label their goods, even though their goods will never come to Northern Ireland. That's what members for other parts of the United Kingdom should realise. These regulations, if the government acts upon them, will require producers in GB supplying to GB to put on their produce not for EU. These are regulations ill-considered, which do nothing to address the fundamental problem of the distortion and the upset to the UK internal market that has flowed from the Windsor Framework and Protocol, which was in identical terms in this regard. And so, if this government wants an answer to the Irish sea border, then it lies in the very simple but workable proposition of mutual enforcement, that you send goods to a recipient country meeting their standards and vice versa. You don't need any of this crazy trade impeding, reducing paraphernalia, and you certainly don't need to put extra cost of business, which is what these regulations foolishly will do, all for the purpose of the Prime Minister being able to say, I'm a faithful implementer of the Windsor Framework, even though the Windsor Framework is tearing apart this union and literally divorcing Northern Ireland from its natural market, is which is so impeded by regulations to which